Hey everybody, it's hwsteele here, and in today's video I want to talk to you about W.D. Gann's book, The Tunnel Through the Air. More specifically, a couple of words out of Gann's book, The Tunnel Through the Air. Now let me pull the PDF up here to make things really easy. And I want to show you, this is the foreword of the book, the very beginning obviously. And the fourth word of the foreword of Gann's book is the word man, and that's specifically what we're going to look at, and that's going to bring us to another logical word that we would look at after that, which is going to point to some possibilities. And what I want you to do is to observe the method with which we're looking at these things. So the basic idea isn't so much that you're going to get a whole bunch of information from this video, but you're going to get more along the lines of a method to possibly mine some information out of this book all by yourself. That's not to say there won't be some revelations that several people out there have not thought of yet probably, and there's probably a lot of people who have noticed this already too, but for those looking for helping hand, so to speak, to so-called decode this book, this might be helpful to you. So we're going to approach this with several things in mind, several presumptions actually made, and that is that W.D. Gann knew what he was doing and that he was actually a good trader, or at least a good forecaster. Because just because you can forecast well doesn't actually mean you can trade well. Those are two different things, so that's something to keep in mind. Your goal should be trading well, not necessarily forecasting well. Although forecasting well can help you trade well, it doesn't guarantee it, not by a long shot. So we're going to assume that Gann was actually a master of what he did, forecasting and supposedly trading, and we're going to assume that he had some knowledge that would help us if we had that knowledge also. And we're also going to assume that he not only gave that knowledge in his books on the surface level, but he possibly hid some extra knowledge below the surface level, especially in this book, W.D. Gann's The Tunnel Through the Air, or looking back from 1940. So those are our presumptions that we're going to start off with. I guess we can add to that he was using the so-called esoteric sciences, such as astrology and numerology and things of that nature, and they at the very least played a role in his methodologies of forecasting the market to help him trade the market. So with those presumptions in mind, we're going to look at the word man and then look at another word that's very obviously derived from the word man, and I'm just going to go ahead and tell you that that's the word woman, right? It would make sense if you're talking man, you would talk woman too, or you would think of them. Now, things like title of something sounding like something else, and then pointing to something such as the word foreword, which is the title of this section of the book, and then using the fourth word in the foreword, man. Now that's a possibility of ways to look for a deeper meaning in this book. But another thing you can look at is the number of words, the number of times a word shows up, the number chapter, the number of the page, so forth and so on, because numbers are the only thing that everybody agrees on, right? Isn't that basically what Gann said, that mathematics is the only science that everyone agrees on, and basically everything else, no one is in complete agreement on everything. So that would be the most fundamental way to plant information, is to do it through or with mathematics, or I guess I could say numbers. So with that in mind, we can also make the assumption that Gann would do a lot of his planting information below the surface level with the use of numbers one way or another, or at least using numbers to point to certain things. So that's a whole lot of assumptions that get to be made, to start off with to make what I'm about to show you and talk about a valid possibility. So whether you agree with the presumptions or not, that's completely up to you. But if you do agree with the presumptions, at least mostly, then you should pay attention and watch the methodology or the logic behind what I'm going to do here. It's actually simple, and I've kind of covered it before in other videos, but it's always good to reinforce it, right? Because there's a lot of people out there that keep telling me I just don't have the mind to decode Gann's books and so forth, and that's, in my opinion, that's kind of a cop-out. Anyone can do it if you're willing to put the work in, and there has to be an interest there in the first place. And if there's not an interest, because there's a lot of people who just are not interested in trading, so there you go, that would preclude them. Then there's a lot of people who are interested in trading but not interested in anything Gann related. And then of course there's people who are interested in trading and interested in Gann, but they're not interested in anything that's below the surface level, so to speak. And then you have that group that's even smaller, that's finally interested in trading, that's interested in Gann, that's interested in the possibility that he had some super duper knowledge that he possibly hid. So to those people, this video is dedicated, I guess you could say. So let's look at the word man for a second here. If I were to suggest that the word man might be a pointer or a word, a code word, I guess you could say, that's meant to be used in lieu of something else, and then I hinted to you that that something else might be a planet, which planet of our solar system would you think that the word man was representative of? And I'll bet you think that the first thing that comes to your mind is the planet Mars, because the glyph or the symbol for Mars, that circle with the point coming out at the angle, that's actually the glyph or symbol that's used to indicate man in everyday society, at least in the Western world. So it would be a very logical assumption on anyone's part to think that if Gann used the word man, he was probably, if he was going to be indicating a certain planet, he's probably pointing to the planet Mars. Likewise, remember how I said we use the word man, we'll also look at the word woman. If you think of the word woman, what planet would you think that Gann was trying to point to? And classically, you would think, well, that would be the planet Venus, because the glyph or symbol for the planet Venus is what is used to indicate female or woman, at least in Western society, of course. So Mars would be man and Venus would be woman. So every time you saw the word man, you could associate it with Mars in some way. And every time you saw the word woman, you could associate it with Venus in some way. And when you see interactions between the word man and woman in this book, you could assume that you were trying to be shown in a hidden way interactions between the planet Mars and Venus. That would make sense, right? So that's one thing, that's like just slightly below the surface level, right? But if you actually spend time in this book and start to use numbers in association with words, you might come to a very, very different conclusion. Now here's why. If you actually spend the time to go through this book and count every instance of the word man, you're going to find that it shows up 225 times, which is really, really interesting because 225 is the number of days that it takes the planet Venus to orbit the sun. Now, of course, that's just circumstantial evidence right there, but it's literally the exact opposite of what you would be expecting. You would expect the planet Venus to represent woman, but with the word man showing up 225 times, it could be assumed that it was actually pointing to the planet Venus. So we would need some form of verification to be able to make sure that this was actually true. And one of the ways to do that would be to look up the word woman and see how many times the word woman shows up in the book, The Tunnel Through the Air. Now, I'll save any hard work for you and let you know that the word woman shows up 88 times in the book. So that would be a pointer, quite possibly, to the planet Mercury, which you would not be expecting at all in the man or woman situation here. So the word man, instead of Mars, could quite possibly be pointing to the planet Venus, while the word woman, instead of pointing to the planet Venus, could be pointing to the planet Mercury. So when you see an interaction between man and woman in this book, it's very possible that you might be seeing a description of some form of interaction between the planet Venus and Mercury. And that kind of makes sense in the fact that those are the only two planets that are inferior to the planet Earth, meaning they're between the Earth and the Sun. And as a result, those two planets are never, ever more than a certain number of degrees away from the Sun as we see it in the sky. I don't remember off the top of my head exactly what it is. I think Mercury is never more than 26, 28 degrees, something like that. And Venus is never more than 48 degrees, something along those lines. You can look that up online and get that information quite easily through a search engine. And I don't want to go ahead and take the extra time. But the point is, these two planets together have a special relationship when compared to Earth, and that is that they're inferior to Earth. Now, that doesn't mean that Gann was actually pointing to this. It's just a very interesting coincidence. Another coincidence, this is kind of more of a side note right here, is if you will count the number of words in total on the dust jacket of The Tunnel Through the Air, you'll find that there are 225 words on the dust jacket of Tunnel Through the Air. Now you might think that since The Tunnel Through the Air is Gann's second book that he wrote, and Venus is the second planet in the solar system, that might be a possible hint towards the general contents of the book and the possibility of the general contents of the other books that he wrote in order. That would be something to look into, I think. You might be pleasantly surprised with the results of that query if you actually spend some quality time looking into that. But like I said, that's just a side note for what's going on here in this video. So even though I started by looking at the word man here, and it shows up 225 times, which would be possibly indicative of the planet Venus, and then we logically move on to the word woman, and that of course could possibly be indicative of the planet Mercury, I want to move on to the word woman. Now in the foreword here, the fourth word is the word man, but if we go to the fourth page of the book, as numbered by the actual pages in the story, we find the first iteration of the word woman right here on page 4. Okay, now if you count the words, you're going to find that the word woman is the 52nd word on this page. Unless, of course, we don't count these numbers. If this is 1, this is 1, and this is 1, it would be 52 minus 3, which is 49. So either one of those numbers could be very important and something that could be looked into. There's a hint. But what I really want to do here is look at what's being said about the word woman. The first time the word woman shows up in the book. And it says, "Let the woman learn in silence with all subjection. But I suffer not a woman to teach, nor to usurp authority over the man, but to be in silence. For Adam was first formed, then Eve. And Adam was not deceived, but the woman being deceived was in the transgression. So we could, if woman is Mercury and man is Venus, we could be given some information here about the relationships of the two of them, which is entirely possible, and how they would interact with each other. It'd be information that we could keep in mind as we look at different places in the book, but I wanted to point something out to you. It says, "But I suffer not a woman to teach, nor to usurp the authority over the man, but to be in silence, and let the woman learn in silence." The very first time the word woman shows up in the book, it's talking about the woman being in silence. Now, if you think about this book, I don't know, if you really know this book pretty well, you probably know the story and you know some of the components of the story. What would silence, where does that show up in the story later on? That would be a good thing to find out. So if woman is really talking about Mercury and not Venus, and then it's the very first time it shows up, it's being connected to silence, why would that be important? That's the basic question of this video. So that gives you, number one, it gives you kind of a bit of a framework to use to start digging around in this book, if that's something that you're interested in, and it gives you a few hints that you can use. So this video is already past 15 minutes long, so I'm going to go ahead and end it here and hope that it's useful to, at least to some people, and I will talk to everybody in the next video.